Did you know that bullying affects up to 1 in 3 kids with food allergies? So, how do you know if it's happening in your home? Today, we're talking about what food allergy bullying actually looks like, how to open up that conversation with your child without shutting them down, and what to do when it's time to bring the school into it. I'm Courtney, bringing you the patient perspective, joined as always by my fabulous co-host, Dr. Payal Gupta, a board-certified allergist immunologist. Our guest today is licensed psychologist and food allergy mom, Dr. Amanda Whitehouse. This podcast is made in partnership with the Allergy and Asthma Network. We want to thank Genentech and Calio for sponsoring today's episode. While they support the show, all opinions are our own and sponsorship doesn't influence our content or editorial decisions. Any mentions of brands is for informational purposes only and not an endorsement. Now, let's get to it. You're listening to The Itch, a podcast exploring all things allergy, asthma, and immunology.
We are delighted to have Amanda Whitehouse back on the podcast. Amanda, can you do a quick intro of all the amazing things that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a psychologist. I'm a food allergy mom, and I have a private practice where I specialize in food allergy and celiac and food-related anxiety and trauma related to medical issues. My podcast is called Don't Feed the Fear. That's almost a couple of years old now. And I am sharing on social media, trying to teach people and educate people about how to navigate all of these tough things, including I actually just wrote a workbook that's going to be coming out in June about navigating food allergy treatments, how to make decisions that are grounded and how to navigate the social emotional side of that, not just the medical side.
That's awesome. I've listened to your podcast, and as I was saying offline, you have the most soothing voice. So it's really nice to listen to, and gold nuggets all over the place. Even as a doctor who doesn't have a child with food allergies, it's just helpful to see the different nuances of things that people think about during their food allergy journey. And today we're talking about one of those topics, which is kids and teens who have food allergies and bullying around their food allergies, and how to talk to your child, teacher, or even the school system about these behaviors.
How about we start with how often do you see bullying in your practice?
Unfortunately, I think a lot more than we would expect. We're lucky that there is a lot of good research out there. There are, a lot of people working on getting us some information about this, and they say it's anywhere between 30 and 40% of kids with food allergies experience bullying. I would say, and maybe it's because these are a self-selected group that are in therapy, they might be struggling more than others, but I would say I see it in more than that percentage of my clients. It might not be the focus of why they're in treatment, but sometimes it's the kids sharing with me. Sometimes it's the parents bringing their kids in because they're concerned and maybe the child isn't sharing or explaining exactly what it is that they're struggling with. But it's a significant problem.
So I was lucky enough to not be bullied. My mom, however, was bullied by the other moms in my school when it came to food allergies. So I'm actually kind of a novice in this regard. I was very lucky growing up without that. My mom took she took the beating for me, I guess, if you will. But for people who are questioning whether their child is being bullied or who are unsure, what does bullying look like in this context?
Yeah, well, I want to pull a little bit of what you said before we dive into like defining it, because I think that's one of the places that we miss the mark. We talk about bullying as if it's a childhood thing. Adults bully each other too, and we stop calling it bullying, right? So I'm so glad that you didn't have that experience. I'm sure your mom was happy to bear the brunt of it for you. But it is, even though we're talking about kids today, it's hard to separate because parents deal with it too. Adults with food allergies feel isolated or kind of treated differently in different situations. And I think the word bullying is so weighted. So it is good to start with clarifying exactly what it means. When we talk about bullying, it doesn't just mean unkind behavior or teasing or someone being inconsiderate or maybe, the true meaning of the word ignorant and genuinely not understanding. Bullying is really something that is repeated, and it involves some kind of a power dynamic, some kind of an imbalance between the person who's doing the bullying and the person who is being bullied. So that can be sometimes just age. It can be physical size and power. A lot of times it really comes down to something that's more difficult to pin down, which is social differences, right? Where is your social status? What group of friends? Who are the cool kids? Who aren't? And all of those things that are so difficult for us as adults to really monitor and stay on top of because they're wishy-washy, but we all can see it happen. Generally, bullying is something that happens on a repeated basis. So I think sometimes it can be problematic when we say one thing happens between two kids at school and we dive right in and call it bullying. We have a zero tolerance policy for bullying, and it might have been just a disagreement that was something that a kiddo threw in an unkind remark because they were angry, not genuinely bullying as we would define it.
And is there a distinction between bullying and teasing?
Yeah, I think teasing is more of those one off, that kids being mean. It's not okay. I'm not trying to dismiss it. But bullying is another level of intentional cruelty, of intentionally using power dynamics against someone to set them apart or to make them suffer. Unfortunately, kids don't have the best, and adults don't always have the best emotional management skills. So sometimes when kids are fighting or disagreeing about something that has nothing to do with allergies, something mean is going to come out of their mouths. And even if it's not intended to be harmful, the impact of those words still matters. So if that happens, it's still important to address, but I think that needs to be addressed differently than if someone is actually intentionally being targeted and repeatedly or systematically harmed in that way.
So I think that that's really important that we're making all of these distinctions because it helps in the way that you're managing the situations, right? And that's really what we're going to get into today is if it's true bullying, what does that mean? And if it's teasing, what does that mean? Because I think it's important for people to understand what they can do in both situations, especially now that we're really helping people understand what the difference is. And it sounds like the main difference is when it's repeated and it's targeted towards the food allergy itself. Is that what I'm hearing?
And that power dynamic really coming into it. So some differential between the person doing the bullying has an advantage in some way over that kiddo. Again, it can be hard to identify, but really that is another one of the key things that sets the bullying apart from just two kids in the same friend group who are kind of on equal levels socially and physically and age-wise. Technically isn't bullying. It's hard to define it specifically, but that's what makes bullying so difficult is that when someone has an advantage over the other person for some reason that makes it more harmful.
And can you give some examples of what that looks like?
Sure. I think with kids, again, it's hard to identify, but all kids know who the cool kids are in school, right? Or what makes kids cool in that school, if it's the athletes or if they're just more popular or the pretty girls or all those unfortunate things that are real and that genuinely affect kids. And so that I think is the part that takes it a step above teasing itself, which is harmful. Kids can be mean. Kids can do awful things to each other sometimes, but really when it goes beyond into that level of kids knowing their status and using their status to either lift themselves up, to make themselves look cooler and make someone look less cool in relation, it can be physically. Obviously, bullying, we hear a lot about older kids picking on younger kids. Again, all mean behavior is harmful, but it's a lot scarier when it's someone who's older than you or bigger than you or who might have some position in the school, like they might be some kind of a monitor after school, or they might be the crossing guard, or they might have some position of power that makes it more realistic that they would actually harm you or use whatever advantages they have against you. I'm trying to think of an example. I try not to share a lot of specific examples from the kiddos that I work with, but I can share one from my own son's life that I think he doesn't mind me sharing. I've talked about it before, where we went to a birthday party. And of course, birthday parties are notoriously difficult for kids with food allergies as it is. It was a group of kids that went to a different school than we did. Our friend who was hosting the birthday party had friends that my kids didn't know. And so when food was being dealt with and my son just was checking something and said he had food allergies, then some of the kids, most of the kids were lovely, but some of them started making snide remarks and they said, well, why don't you just eat this? And he said, I can, I'm allergic. And then of course it was later. It was calculated. It wasn't just someone making an offhanded remark. It was those kids waiting until the adults weren't looking, taking that food, chasing him around the park where the party was at with it, teasing him, I'm going to make you eat it, things like that are intentional and targeted. And they have that comfort because these are all their classmates and they're an older and a bigger kid using all of those things against him to make him feel not just uncomfortable, but unsafe.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that example. And it's just so hard to hear, actually, to be honest with you. Just anyone being mean to anyone, but for a child to have to go through that. And then what is that going to make your son feel like for the next birthday party? And that's really the next topic that we want to talk about is when this happens, how do you talk to your son or daughter about that experience? And how do you make them feel supported?
It's a great question, and it's really tricky to answer because one of the things that I wanted to point out, I was lucky that my son told me right away. I mean, at the party, he came over, his brothers were there, and his brothers were sticking up for him. And it was hard, but it was also, in a way, it was good to see like that his brothers had his back and some of that camaraderie between them and how upsetting it was to everybody, not just to my son. Glad he wasn't all alone when it was happening to him, as he might have been in a different setting. And I'm glad that he told me. But the statistics show that about 60% of kids who are bullied don't tell their parents that it's happening. So we will talk about what to do. But I think maybe first, if it's okay, we should talk about the fact that a lot of us aren't going to know that it's happening. So what parents will often see, or teachers will often pick up on, they're great and they can be really perceptive. It can be really general. It can be really vague in terms of behavioral signals that something is off with the kiddo. And the older they get, the more likely this is to happen, because the older kids get, the less they want to stand out from their peers, the more they don't want anybody to know that they told the teacher. That's why bullying works. That power differential that kids use when they bully someone else scares them into thinking, well, if you act this way, if you tell, if you get me in trouble, it's going to get worse. Wait till you see what's coming if I get in trouble because of what you did or what you said. So it can be really hard for us as adults to understand how powerful that social impact really is on our kids, and that fear. I've worked with kids who the fear of other kids finding out that they told on them is bigger than the fear of their allergy. So this is one of the biggest signs. Kids might stop or back off on their whatever behaviors they need to do to be safe from their allergies. So they might stop being as obvious about checking labels. They might not ask as loudly or as directly. They might sometimes, unfortunately, even just kind of eat something in the presence of their peers because they don't want to make a big deal and call attention to themselves. And that's really telling for kids that know that that's risky, to be willing to do that over the chance of being bullied again or being singled out. So that's one of the biggest indicators. I would say any kind of shift in the child that just doesn't seem like it's them. If they're more withdrawn, if their mood seems different, if they a lot of times are acting angry at other people. So it might be that they come home and they're lashing out at you, or their siblings are getting under their skin much more easily. We might see a shift in their schoolwork. Their grades might decline because they already spend so much mental energy managing the allergy at school. And then if they're worried about what class that kiddo is going to be or where they're going to see them in the hallway, they're not focused on listening to the lesson or the test or whatever the academic demand is in front of them. So those things don't necessarily mean that it's bullying, but those are the kinds of things that we want to look for.
There's also not wanting to go to school, or all of a sudden you loved soccer and then all of a sudden you don't love soccer. So those are also some telltale signs that I've heard of. I wasn't bullied for food allergies, but I was bullied for other things. And that was one of the telltale signs for my mom, is I didn't want to go to school anymore and she didn't know why.
Absolutely. It's such a great point. Really, yeah, any shift like that is a change in the behavior pattern, but it is a lot of withdrawal. It's avoidance. It's withdrawing from people, places, things. It might not even seem connected to the bullying. It might not be that they don't want to go to school. That can be it, but it might also just be that on the weekends, they just kind of want to stay home and lay around instead of going out and doing things because of the way that they're emotionally impacted.
Wow. So that sounds like it would be really challenging, right, for that child to even open up because they know that their parent or their caretaker is going to be upset. And they know that likely that there's going to be action taken. The person's not just going to listen and say, okay, well, I understand this is happening. Thanks for letting me know. There's definitely going to be something that the parent is going to want to do. And I think that most kids know that. And so, how do you navigate that situation once you know that something's happening? And how do you make your child feel safe? So, then how do you start that conversation without making your child shut down?
Right. So it's really tricky. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said we don't want to dive in with action, with here's what I'm going to do to address this issue right away. Obviously, that is important. I'm not saying we don't need to take actions to keep this kiddo physically and medically and emotionally safe. But if we start there, we might not even find out what's going on. Right. So I think our really good parenting skills and connection skills and our communication with our kids really come into play here, where we want to focus on acknowledging and validating their emotions, just being present with them, and being able to create a space that isn't putting any of our emotion or behavior or reactivity into the conversation or the interaction. So that comes from not just how do I address bullying, but that's just a parenting skill in general that we have to learn, is that we are collaborators with our kids on how we deal with their problems, and we're going to be consulting them when something's wrong. We can do that when kids are tiny. I'm sorry that your cup spilled. What should we do when kids are upset? Not just swooping in like, of course we want to, and comforting them and making everything okay. That's a gradual transition over time that leads to important things like this when they get older, that we've established that they are on our team, but we respect their input and their opinion on how they want to approach their problems. So of course it's different when they're much younger versus older kids, if we're talking about middle schoolers or high schoolers. But we want to approach the conversations really openly. Most of the time, we will just be having a sense that something's off, not just getting a direct report that there was bullying. And so we want to go into it really open. The best ways to have conversations with kids are not to sit down face to face across the table. You arrived home from school and now you need to sit down and have a talk, because that's really emotionally intimidating for them. So these are the kinds of things where we pull in those relational skills of going for a walk together. Let's get out a puzzle and work on it tonight. Maybe we eat dinner first or have a snack so that our bodies are nourished and we're feeling good and well hydrated and well nourished, and connecting first before we take any action or address the problem. So there's a line that I love that's pretty common in the field: connection before correction. So it refers to behavior problems, like if a child is misbehaving, but it really applies to all of these things. Before you take any action, you want to make sure that you've really established that connection with your child. And then I think when you start talking about it, you want to use really open-ended questions. And you want to make sure that you're aware, even if you don't intend to sound accusatory, that it's not coming across in a way that might feel that way to the child. They have been made to feel that it's their fault if they're being bullied. They have also been made to feel that it is their responsibility to not let it happen. Because of course, when there's relational problems in school, when kids don't get along, the teacher can't hash out every little thing between the kids. So they've heard a lot of, work it out, make sure you guys deal with it, stay away from him. What did you do? Did you say something to upset him? We have to be so mindful not to go into a conversation like this, making it feel like they did something to deserve it, or that they have to be responsible for stopping it. So what that sounds like is just a lot of noticing. I use that word probably way too much with my kids and the kids that I work with, but I noticed that you don't want to go to soccer anymore. You used to love soccer so much. We're not 10 steps down the road to bullying. We're just sharing what is different with the child in a really caring and compassionate way that shows it's not, I paid for soccer and now you're not going, right? I don't think we would approach it in that way, but sometimes that plays into it. So there's no blaming, no fault finding, just noticing and validating those feelings. A lot of the times the kids will be in denial of it for the reasons we already discussed. They don't want to share it. So we're just sharing what we've noticed that has brought up our concerns, right? You have been not wanting to go to school. It seems like you're coming home and your lunchbox has a lot more food left in it than it used to. I was just wondering why. Trying not to use any of those leading questions that really will open up the conversation. Maybe not all at that point in time, but over time, little by little.
Can you give an example of what you mean by leading question?
Right. So if I noticed, for like the example that I just gave, if my kiddo came home and his lunchbox all of a sudden has all of his lunch in it, he's not eating anything. I might lead him into what I think is going on by saying, is something upsetting you that's making you not eat your lunch at school? Is somebody bothering you during lunchtime? Did somebody pick on you for what's different? Any assumption that I have that gets laced into that question is leading them to what I think is going on and might keep me from actually getting the answer that's correct. Even though it takes longer to get to it, sometimes we really want the child's perspective, not ours. Does that make it more clear?
Got it. You actually don't wanna do that. You don't wanna try to lead them in the direction that you think, because then they're like, "Wait, what's going on? She's already figured it out," and it almost puts them on the defensive, because I've seen that happen with my son too, just about other things, where as soon as you start going in that way, then they start becoming defensive. And so using more open-ended things. I just noticed that you don't like to go to soccer, instead of, like you said, I noticed that you're not going to soccer, but is it because of, and then you're giving them the answer. So not giving any kind of answers is basically what you're saying, and just leaving it open.
Yeah, and I think this is a skill that we all need in all areas of life, not just parenting, but we are so bad as humans at just letting someone share their story with us. So it's hard to learn how to ask open-ended questions, but do it. Practice with your spouse, practice with your friends, and this is a skill that we can develop because it's so much more supportive. Like, tell me about how lunch has been lately. A lot of times they don't even sound like questions. They're like prompts. What's been going on at lunch? I noticed things like that aren't really even asking a specific question to get a specific piece of information.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was talking with my neighbor about this, about how so many of us jump to solutions. So we're problem solvers, and I feel like for parents it's even worse probably. So you just want to solve the problem right then and there instead of quietly listening, because a lot of the times the person you're talking to might be able to solve their own problem, but it just takes a while before they get there.
You're so right. You don't even need me for this episode. You're on top of it because that's what we do. And I would take that a step further. I think the reason that we do that, the reason that we jump to wanting to solve the problem for people we care about is because we don't want them to be hurting. We want to solve their pain. We want them to feel reassured. We hate it. And so that's another one of those general people skills that we really need to hone as allergy parents is creating the capacity that I love to talk about, like nervous system regulation. This is where that comes in. I can stay regulated and calm and handle my own emotions and be with the person that I love in their big feelings without rushing to stop them from feeling the way that they do. So that I think is what's behind it. And that is what allows what you said, really understanding their perspective and creating room for their feelings is by me being okay with them and not having to rush to make them go away.
Man, I always learn so much, and I'm not even a food allergy parent. I always learn so much about parenting in general whenever we do these episodes. Now that we've kind of established what are the signs that you look for when someone's being bullied, and then how do you start that conversation and allow the child to talk? Let's say they don't. Let's say they're really not willing to open up. And then do you go to the teacher and try to dissect it that way? Do you go to the school? Like, what is your next route if you can't build that connection and they're really not wanting to share? What's happening?
That's a good question. And I think that is probably where a lot of parents find themselves in terms of the child not sharing or sometimes not even being able to vocalize it. The younger they are, the harder it is to even connect. I've just been feeling sad with what's going on. And this is where it gets really tricky because, as I said before, we want to involve the kids. So a lot of parents will just email the teacher, they'll just call the school, they'll just reach out to the parent that they think the child might be having an issue with. And that can really make our kids feel betrayed, angry with us, distrusting, but we need to protect them, right? So this is where, again, we stay on those good conversational skills. And if the child is not opening up, we stay connected, we stay really regulated, not in a frantic, I know something's wrong and we have to do something about it kind of way, but just in a way that's open and honest with the child. But it's okay if you're not sure why, you're feeling different or what's different about soccer, but it feels really important to me. I care about you so much that I don't want you to stop enjoying the things that you did, or I don't want you to feel like you don't want to go to school. School should be fun for you. So let's talk about what maybe we can do to help figure it out together and really getting into a collaborative problem solving conversation with them, even if sometimes what you have to do. Right? You know that at the end of this conversation, you're going to have to talk to the teacher, but having the child be involved with it and feel like they have some level of choice, some amount of control over the situation. Those are the two things that help us to stay a little bit more regulated as all people and all things. And that definitely applies in this situation. I think it's important for us to take it really seriously that these social dynamics and fears that kids have of being different and being outed feel genuinely to them like a safety issue. Their nervous system is actually often in fight or flight about what might happen, how these kids might respond if they find out at school. So if we dismiss that, that is going to only reinforce and make them feel even more scared and afraid and worried about what might happen. So the child might not like the idea. We might reach a point in the conversation, depending on what information comes up or how significant the concerns are. Like if the child every day is not wanting to go to school, we involve them in the conversation. But as a parent, in the end, we are going to have to say, it is really important for you to go to school. We have to find a way to work on it. What are some of the best ways? If I have to talk to the teacher, give them a choice. Would you like me to email her? Would it feel better if I call her? Would you like to let her know that I want to talk to her? Give them some control over a little part of the situation, even if you know that there's some stuff that you're going to have to take that they might not want you to do. You can let them pick what day it is. Do you want me to say it today before the weekend so we can sit on it together? Or do you want to wait until Monday? Little things like that give them choice and power and control can help when they're probably feeling really scared and upset about whatever actions we might take.
That's great. And then one other thing that I thought about while you were talking about all of this is you kind of said what we can do as parents just to kind of set the stage in general, like when a child is younger, giving them those problem solving skills early on. But as a food allergy parent, should you be talking to your kids about the potential for bullying early on so that they understand that this is a potential. And if it does happen, this is the reason that it could be scary for everyone involved. And how would you communicate that?
That's a good question. And it's so hard because it's one of those conversations that food allergy parents just never want to have with their kids. Like, it's hard enough to talk about, okay, your epinephrine, maybe not anymore, but your epinephrine is a needle. And if you have to use it, it will hurt. And your food allergies can be really serious and make you really sick. Like, all this bad news that we have to deliver. The last thing we want to say is, and kids might not like you and pick on you and be really mean to you because of it. Unfortunately, even though it's true. So I like to work those conversations into really general things, like absolutely kids need to know about bullying. And I think most schools are addressing it nowadays. So I think if we're talking about that in a general sense at home too, and what does bullying look like? And what do kids bully? Well, anything that's different about someone, not just food allergies. If you look different, anything that's different about you from other kids, sometimes kids will take advantage of that to make you feel badly about yourself. And of course, we're going to work on their self-confidence around their allergies and around anything else they might be dealing with. A lot of kids with food allergies don't just have food allergies, they have other stuff too. And just reinforcing that message over and over throughout time and demonstrating with our behaviors that it's never okay for someone to mock or make fun of or belittle someone for anything that's different about them. And I think if kids know that, even if they don't have the words to say, like, I was bullied today for my food allergies, I think they'll have an inner sense that it was wrong for them to say something mean about my food at lunch being different. I think it could do more harm than good just to sit them down and say, listen, food allergy bullying is a thing, and I want to make sure nobody picks on you for it. I like to give kids really specific things that they can say, again, not specific to food allergy bullying, but just to prepare them for those situations for their friends and for themselves. So it's not just about that you might be bullied, but if someone is picking on someone else, here's what we do. Here's how you can stand up to friends who aren't being kind, and give them lines that they can practice, that they've heard over and over, so they're easier to pull into the moment anytime someone is being unkind.
Is there a differentiation between ages? So I'm just thinking about what we're talking about so far. And I feel like this is more, I don't know, and I don't really know kids that well, so please correct me if I'm completely wrong, but this feels a little bit more like elementary school. And I feel like when we get to middle school, high school, it's way more complex. And now with cell phones and et cetera, I feel like it gets even more complex and even more like psychological than just being threatened by a peanut butter sandwich. Like back in my day, that's what kids got bullied with. So, is there something that's different between these age groups that we should kind of pull out?
Yes, you nailed it again. I mean, when kids are younger, it's the chasing, it's the yelling on the playground and saying mean things or leaving mean notes. As kids get older, it gets more relational. And as they get devices in their hands, it shifts out of the classroom and into social media and into emails and texts and things like that that might be harder for parents to catch. So some of the general things obviously are like gauging when your child is ready for those things, noticing the difference if your child's behaviors are shifting when they're on their phones more or when they've had a new app or a new social media. I hate social media for kids. There's a time that they have to learn to use it, and I can't tell you when that is, but it does open up a lot more possibilities. And I think that, yes, the coping skills then have to change too. But for example, the piece that I was just talking about giving kids something that they can say, that if the foundation is there, the language can mature and it can get more nuanced as they get older. But if an elementary school kiddo knows to say, it's not okay to pick on someone, we're going to go play somewhere else, there's a version of that for middle schoolers and there's a version of that for high schoolers that might sound a little bit more cool or whatever it might be, like, hey, that's not cool. We're not going to hang out if you are going to talk that way or something like that. I think it can shift over time, but then teaching kids online literacy is a huge part of this.
Okay, so that also becomes part of the conversation nowadays with bullying is that how do we filter what we're reading on our phones? Because I feel like you can be a lot more nasty when you're not in front of the person.
Yeah. And I think parental monitoring apps, I think, are totally appropriate. I think that parents should really be mindful of how they're using some of those things that alert them. You know, there are monitoring apps that alert you if your child's texts or whatever content they're consuming has concerning phrases in it that will keep them from going in certain places. A lot of parents will establish, and I encourage them to have an open phone rule that, you know, if you have this phone, but we're paying for it, we have the right to, that's not the way you word it. You don't say we have the right, but here's the plan to make sure that we're protecting you and keeping you safe. We are going to check maybe from time to time, or if we think that something is wrong. And I think, again, if you go back to what we said earlier about doing that in a really open and collaborative way that involves the kids from the beginning, then that's a really good way to establish trust. You could do the opposite. You could hand them a phone and not tell them that you're reading their texts, and then see something from someone that's awful, and they're going to feel so betrayed by you, they're not going to tell you anything. So I think we have to let them know up front that that's the way that it's going to be. Even if they don't like it, I understand, but here's the rules and I will involve you. If, for example, we get to a point with them where we're concerned that there's something happening on their phones or on social media about bullying or being picked on for their food allergies, I wouldn't say just, well, I'm going to read their text tonight because we told them that we might do that. I would say all the things we already talked about, having a conversation with them, getting their input, and then expressing really openly and honestly, I'm concerned that social media is a way for people to do what you just said, to act differently than they would in front of adults. And so I would really like to see how things have been between you and your friends in the Discord group or whatever it might be, that hopefully you have some connection to, that you know that you've been monitoring and know that these are the places where they land when they have their phones in their hands. And then sitting down, giving them the option, if they would like to look at it together if it comes to that. And some kids will choose not to. And a lot of times that's a good sign that there's something in there that they don't want you to see, and they don't want to see your reaction when you see it. But even, again, just giving them the choice and involving them in the conversation rather than springing it on them or taking over will help to ease some of that. It will not make it perfect. This is one of the hardest aspects of parenting, but those are the ways that we can try to preserve some of that trust and connection with them, even when we're doing these really tough things.
Yeah. So, what I'm hearing really is that open communication, making sure you're setting ground rules, having an opportunity to talk about general conversations around bullying. As you mentioned, it sounds like schools are already doing that now for kids. And so, not necessarily connecting it to their food allergy, because that might make them even more nervous about their food allergy, which is what we don't want to do, but just giving them life skills in general, problem solving skills that will help them navigate all of these issues essentially.
Definitely. And I wouldn't scare them that that's going to happen, but also not to be afraid to call it out if that is what's happening and they're not naming it. If you know that someone is bullying them because of their food allergies, as you've talked about it and gotten the information from them, it's okay to say to them, that really sounds like bullying, and to explain why. And sometimes when we connect that word for them, that helps them to understand the seriousness of it a little bit more, because they have learned about bullying and because that's hopefully something that schools are not tolerating, but they might not have thought to put that label on it.
Totally makes sense. Like give them vast array of examples that also includes things that they might actually personally deal with, but also for them to understand how other peers might be bullied so that they can be an advocate for their friends too. Doing it in that context then makes them understand that anyone can be bullied for almost any reason. And I think that that helps it not feel as targeted to them and their differences.
Right. And framing it the way you said, not as you might be bullied and setting them up to think that they're going to be the victim, but bullying is not okay. And here's what we do. Here's how you can protect your friends. If someone, here's what you can say, not just that they're the likely target, but that it's all of us that can stand up to it, that can speak up when we see something going wrong, including if it happens to ourselves.
Great. And then I know we've kind of touched on the different ways that it affects kids, not only, missing events, missing school, and then also the safety concerns, as you mentioned, with a food allergy, taking more risky behaviors, not speaking up, all of those things. But emotionally and psychologically, can you just comment on exactly how bullying can affect children?
I think the most important part of that to understand is that kids with food allergies are already living with so much fear, and the bullying layers another degree of fear on top of what they're already living with. So in addition to the things that you just mentioned, I think we have to be on the lookout for genuine mental health concerns to arise. And we already talked about what some of the signs of those are, but they really involve kids pulling away from us a lot of the time, shutting out parents, not talking about things when they probably need the help the most. So it can lead to a lot of eating changes for kids. This might be the time where we see kids just start restricting their food or not wanting to eat in front of other people, where some unhealthy eating behaviors might emerge. And I think that's really important to keep an eye out for, and to know that it might be connected to something like this. Obviously, we're always on the eye out for depression and anxiety symptoms in kids, and things like the overall quality of life being important too, that we don't want them restricting their life or holding back or limiting things that might be important to them having a full healthy life and reaching their goals and doing the things that they want to be doing and having the relationships that they want. I think it can really range, but it is important to mention that genuine mental health concerns can arise at these times and be connected to this. And we need to be on the lookout for it and ready to support kids with that.
I think for me, depression and anxiety were obvious things that I would think about with something like this, but the element of it leading to an actual eating disorder is something that I hadn't really thought about. And I know that that is possible for anyone that has a food allergy. So I just wanted to highlight that. So noticing that your child is losing weight or gaining weight may be another sign that something's going on and may also alert you to talk to your child about what else might be happening.
And I would add to that, I know it's too big of a topic for us to dive into, but I just want to make sure I throw in, a lot of people just know about, restrictive eating and weight loss, but if kids are being secretive about food, not wanting to eat in front of people, taking food to their room, so binging, purging are also concerns. And then there are two other concerns that we see more often now with kids getting really picky about their food. There's something called ARFID, and then there's something called orthorexia, which isn't a diagnosable eating disorder, but just becoming overly focused on health or the nutrition of the food, or in some way it taking up too much mental space. So it's not just those classic things that we think of in terms of restriction and weight loss.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and say I think there's a parallel to control. So finding places where you can control, because like the bullying is something you can't control, but you can control what you put into your body. And I think the added layer of having food allergies where you've already had things taken away from you, so there's a sense of outer control, so you're looking for that inner control. And so I feel like in one aspect, when I think about it, that's maybe where the eating disorder and the food allergy parallel come into play. But there's also the like obsessive compulsive disorder, and I'm not sure if that's also something that we should just highlight, because I know that OCD and food allergy are also friends, if you will.
It's a great point. And I think that they can be connected or misunderstood, confused for one another. And you said it perfectly, that we all want a sense of control over something. And then you think about living with a food allergy. How do you manage your food allergy safely? We have to have control over so many more things than most people do. And so that's actually a coping skill that gets really reinforced. And most of us tend to lean on one coping skill more than others. So if we've already been pushed in that direction, then that can just be kind of our go-to way that our nervous system has learned to make something safe. I feel safer when I have control, or when I check. Maybe we don't intentionally restrict with food allergies, but kids with food allergies are probably a lot more experienced at, oh, I can't eat that, or I'm just not going to eat that because I'm not sure. So that can be a positive skill that can just get relied on a little bit too heavily and become problematic. You explained it so well.
I feel like we can spend the next 20 minutes going into this. So I'd love to just pivot us and go into the school, if we can do that really quickly. So we mentioned bringing the teacher into the conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like for the parent? You said to involve the child, but once you get into the school system, what does that look like, and how can a parent prepare for navigating that?
The best thing the parent can do to prepare is to know their rights. So, to know the school's policies on bullying, if your child already has some sort of a plan, if they have a health plan or if they have a 504 plan, double check what's in that, what's supposed to be happening, and ground yourself in what you know your child's rights are and what is supposed to be happening for your child, really before you even reach out to the school. I don't want to set it up like it's going to be a confrontational interaction, but I think you can feel much more secure going into it, knowing what your rights are and what you have the right to ask for. If you can pull open the school's bullying policy and show it to the person that you end up talking to there, or what is happening in their 504 that's not supposed to be happening in school but is taking place, then you have a really specific starting point to ask for a change if you feel like it needs to happen. But it is really tricky because it's out of our hands as parents too. We can't just march in and make the school do something that we feel is right. The kids don't usually want us to do anything, unfortunately, a lot of the time. Again, using our great conversational skills, same thing with the teacher or with an administrator at the school, or whoever you think it might be that is the point person on the issue that you suspect or know is happening, to go into that conversation really open. Again, something like, he said that this is happening, what have you seen? Or I've noticed this, and to open a conversation from there. But I would do all of that in writing. I would document the process, because food allergy bullying is genuinely a safety issue. all bullying is, but food allergy, the stakes are a lot higher. And we do know, unfortunately, that dangerous things sometimes happen. So be as wonderful and friendly and open and receptive as you can be, and know your rights and document everything along the way so that if there is an action happening, you have a trail of emails or meetings that you've taken notes on to establish that you've been trying. And hopefully the school will be cooperating, but if not, you have some evidence behind you to make sure that you can get some change.
I thought it was interesting that you're using the same language, even with teachers and administrators, which is, I noticed that this is happening. Could you help me figure out what might be going on? So, even with adults, it sounds like you need to not jump in with action, figuring out together that there is a problem, and then together figuring out what that solution is.
Definitely. And I think it's that same concept of connecting. Connect with the teacher before you correct. Like you may have experience that suggests otherwise, but assume that your teacher is there because they want to work with kids and they want your child to learn and be healthy and well, and start from there. And then again, this is one of those points where we really have to be mindful of our own regulation and where our nervous systems are at before we start a conversation. Because if someone is hurting my child, whether it's emotionally or physically, I'm in fight mode and I want to march into that school and I want to take care of it. And obviously that's not necessarily going to lead to the best interaction. So get that energy out, do what you have to do, complain to your friend, take a brisk walk, get yourself in a better spot before you're initiating these conversations so that you can make the most of them instead of creating conflicts where maybe they didn't have to be.
Yeah, I think the key is realizing that people are in these systems to help children. And so they may not have noticed because they're dealing with 20 other children that something has been going on. And they might have just thought, oh, yeah, I noticed that, but I wasn't sure. But you're the parent or the caregiver, and you know when there's a difference in behavior more than anyone else. And so going in with an open mind, understanding that they might not have even noticed, and you're helping them understand that, hey, this is actually becoming something bigger. And then again, trying to come up with a solution together as opposed to coming in ready to act.
So I think we've set a really good foundation of what does bullying look like? How do you recognize it in your child? How do you start that conversation with your child? How do you start that conversation in the school if that needs to happen? What about the other side? So we've done all of this. Can a kid who's been bullied become more resilient? How do you help them heal from that process? Can we just talk a little bit about what that looks like once we've addressed the bully, basically?
Yes, and I think that's so important. I think that also is really tied to what action ends up getting taken. So again, if we try to resolve this issue in a way where that child feels even more alienated and targeted, then that's going to be problematic. So I think in just the way that we deal with the bullying, we can begin to address that. And I hear a lot of stories of really positive education and teamwork and camaraderie coming out of these situations. And that's usually where we're talking about it like it always happens at school, and it doesn't. So I'm sorry for leaning too much on that example, but I've seen some great teachers where the child who was doing the bullying was addressed obviously privately and appropriately, and the response that was public to the other kids in the classroom or in the school was really positive. That someone, for younger kids, they might bring in a book, or the parent might come in and read, or the nurse, and have a special day and maybe have a treat that's safe for that kid with the food allergies, and make it a really positive thing where not just the child with the food allergy or the child who's being bullied about anything, but the whole class is praised and rewarded and taught and empowered to not allow bullying and to support the kid. So now that kid that was doing the bullying feels that sense of what they were doing is on the outskirts, and that is not okay, and kids might not appreciate them for that, versus making it continue to be about the child who was bullied. So I think positive, like educational approaches like that. Let's assume that everybody doesn't know. Let's assume that kids didn't realize that they could get really sick if someone exposed their allergen to them, and educating. And then for the child that's experienced it, again, we talked about empowering them before, but involving them in the solution versus swooping in and saving them and protecting them is the key to doing this, because we don't want to feel like they need us to protect them from every little thing, even though we will. We want them to be learning these skills as they go. And if we come up with a solution that they feel like they have ownership over and it helped, then obviously they're going to feel a little bit more confident about how to navigate things. And if we come up with a solution and it continues to happen anyway, and the solution doesn't really help, then they don't feel powerless. They don't feel angry at us because we did A, B, and C, and they didn't want us to do any of those things. They wanted to handle it this way. If they're involved with whatever the action is, then that is a step toward involving them in their own protection rather than making them feel weak and singled out.
Amazing. So it really does sound like the way that you start that conversation is a trajectory towards how you're going to leave your child after the whole bullying debacle hopefully comes to an end. What I keep on hearing, what I love is involving the child or teen. Having them guide the conversation, having them guide the action, because at the end of the day, you want them to feel like they have power and they have the ability to shape their future. Because if we're constantly paving the way for them, then they're never going to build that resilience that they're going to need to have, because hopefully they don't, but maybe they will in the future encounter another bully. And then we've given them the tools to deal with that and nip it in the bud.
Absolutely. Again, we don't have to make it about food allergy at all. I think this is about the culture that we create around how people are treated and who is accepted. I could get up on my soapbox, but this is why every difference in every person matters for our children to learn that it's not okay to single people out. And if they live with that mindset that that's how the world should be and we don't accept it, a lot of people will make the opposite argument. The world is tough and they need to learn how to deal with it when people are mean. And I say the opposite. If they learn that that is not acceptable behavior, that is abusive, if the adults in their lives are modeling that, and I think that's one of the things we didn't touch on in terms of dealing with the actual child who's doing the bullying. I like to not label them a bully, but kids learn these behaviors from the adults in their lives, and they learn these perceptions that making someone different can make them less than. And so if we don't stand for any of it, as a family, as a school, as a community, as a society, I think that's where our children are the best off. So again, I could launch off into every way that that can play, but it's not okay to treat anybody that way ever for anything about them. And if kids really believe that and they see that modeled in their lives and they see people treated like that, I think they're much, much less likely to stand for it, whether it's them or someone else if they see being treated poorly.
Thank you so much. Those are such helpful tips. But my mind also goes to, when would you also consider talking to a therapist?
Great question. I think anytime you make that decision, I would frame it as something that's not making them, again, feel it's their fault or it's something's wrong with you and you need to go to therapy. I say this to people all the time. It's not about if you need therapy. Would therapy be helpful? We all deserve a space to talk about our feelings where we don't have to worry about anyone else, that is supportive, where we can learn, better understand ourselves. So we frame it positively like that. And I would consider therapy really a lot of the things we already talked about. If they are persisting for a long period of time, or if they are interfering with daily life. If your child is just not themselves for a long period of time, I would seek therapy. If there are major changes, if there's ongoing school refusal, if they are withdrawing socially and it's persistent over more than a couple of weeks, I would definitely reach out. If you see changes that are significant in their eating habits, in their weight, in their clothing fitting them, or the sizes that they're wearing, I would honestly encourage parents too to ask their child, not just to decide like, again, okay, it's time to go to therapy. But even if you're not sure that it's at that level where that would be necessary, I would ask the child. Most kids know what counseling is. Would you like to go talk to somebody about your feelings and get some help with this? And we could learn some tools together, give them the option. A lot of kids, that's private. No one's going to know if a parent is taking them to a therapist outside of school. And kids often, especially younger kids, are really receptive to that idea and that kind of special attention. So I would even encourage people to throw it out there and let the child be a part of that decision too.
Thank you so much. I feel like we have a lot of new tools for a lot of parents' toolkits. And is there any last words that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I would just like to encourage parents, because this can be a really emotional and scary and difficult topic, to know that if this is happening to your child, they'll get through it. If it does happen to them in the future, they will get through it. And what will help with that is creating safety at home. It starts with your relationship with them. So if you are close and connected and trusting in your relationship with your child, and if they feel safe, not just physically, but emotionally in your home to have their feelings and to express difficult emotions, then that's the foundation for them moving through this and being resilient and doing well, even if they have difficult experiences.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Remember that all information you hear today is for informational purposes only and are not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, and/or medical treatment of a qualified physician or healthcare provider. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. And if you have a second, help spread the word by rating our podcast and sharing with your friends and family who might also be interested in learning more about allergies, asthma, and immunology. You can always stay up to date by checking out our Instagram, The Itch Podcast, where you can leave questions you are itching to know, or check out our website, which is www.itchpodcast.com, which contains more information about the subjects we covered in today's episode and every episode. Until next time, have a fabulous week.